The mere mention of spreadsheets or financial modeling can relegate some startup founders to tears, even those with some background or experience with basic accounting or finance.
Most people, when they hear the word financial modeling or projections, they think of these complex math equations and that you have to be an Excel wizard to be able to make any sense of it. And forecasting is hard. And oh, well, no one has a crystal ball anyway, so what's the point of the exercise?
In this interview, FlowCog founder Adam Tzgournis shares the next generation of financial modeling tools that make it simple and easy for anyone to quickly build out meaningful financial projections.
This is a drag and drop tool. It's very visual, very heavily focused on those visualizations. The idea is to use the model or whatever tool you're using as a way to answer those what if questions. What happens if we dip in revenue next quarter? What happens if we make that additional hire 1 month sooner than we expected?
You'll also hear the story of this emerging startup that involves an inspiring journey of product iterations and pivots to overcome obstacles and find the right product market fit.
We are going to click on this AI magic build feature, and there was a lot of blood, sweat, tears, and late night coding sessions to make this happen. In addition to being a CPA, I'm also a programmer and very interested in artificial intelligence and what the implications are of it for helping founders and business owners run their businesses more efficiently.
Stay tuned for the first public reveal of powerful AI tools that produce comprehensive financial projections for any startup in minutes using the new FlowCog Magic AI. Let's get into it. Hey, Doc John here, the Entreprofessor. Thanks for joining. I have a great interview today with the founder of FlowCog, Adam Tzgournis. Adam, really glad you're here. Welcome.
Thanks so much for having me, Doc John. Really excited to talk about my startup, my project, the journey, tricks up my sleeve. Got some AI magic later on, so I'm really excited to share it. I actually haven't announced it publicly yet, so you're getting the scoop on it.
All right, you're getting the early inside scoop. That is awesome. Well, and I'm really excited about this because anyone who's studying entrepreneurship or anyone who's launching an entrepreneurial business, the financial modeling often is the big stumbling block that gets in the way, because especially, a lot of my audience is what I call accidental entrepreneurs. That's individuals that, have something they love to do. They have a passion, they have a skill, they have expertise, they have an idea, and they want to do something with it, but they want to have their own business, but they're not sure where to start. They don't have like a formal business background. And the first time I saw FlowCog, I was excited because, the financial modeling, financial projections always throws everybody into like a tailspin. Like, what do I do? And I saw FlowCog and it's like, oh, wow, this is a great solution for anybody in that space. So I'm really excited, but I don't want to get ahead of ourselves here. So tell us about FlowCog, like kind of what is it? What are, who are you serving? What do you want to do? And then almost like your founder story, like how did it all come together?
Yeah. So I think maybe the easiest place to start, and then I'll dive into my background, is most people, when they hear the word financial modeling or projections, they think of these complex math equations and that you have to be an Excel wizard to be able to make any sense of it. And forecasting is hard. And oh, well, no one has a crystal ball anyway, so what's the point of the exercise, right? And the whole idea is that even though you're not going to get exact in terms of your projections for your revenue and your expenses, the idea is to use the model or whatever tool you're using as a way to answer those what if questions. What happens if we dip in revenue next quarter? What happens if we make that additional hire 1 month sooner than we expected, right? So being able to answer those questions and then iterate and use that as a kind of strategic decision-making tool is really kind of the point of the exercise, right? And so the idea then is, okay, how do you do that? How do you give that tool to users in a way that makes it less intimidating, that makes it user-friendly? And that's really hard to do, right? I can tell you from spending thousands of hours in Excel that and building plenty of kind of custom financial models throughout my career at my full-time jobs, as well as side hustle doing consulting, is that the second you hand off that Excel file, it's a kind of all hell breaks loose, right? Like there are no guarantees that the person you're handing it off to knows and understands how to, number one, drive an Excel model, and number two, that they will understand the logic that you built. So there's a kind of this limitation on how much value you can get from a spreadsheet in that way. And
Yeah.
that was part of the motivation to building something like a FlowCog canvas, is because the existing tools out there just don't get the job done. And they're really hard for folks that are not finance people, that are not numbers people, to start to make heads or tails of their business.
Yeah. Well, I find when I teach financial modeling, I almost have to start with teaching Excel, which is like teaching a programming language.
Yeah.
And that's why when the first time I saw FlowCog, I'm like, wow, this is like Scratch for spreadsheets. And if you're not familiar with Scratch, it's like it's useful for teaching kids how to write code, because you just say, what do I want the little cat to do? And you drag it over to the middle. And in a lot of ways, that's the way it feels when I use FlowCog to build a financial model. So it feels like it really demystifies some of that.
Yeah, and that's kind of the exact analogy that I use too. Excel is a watered down programming language, right? So if you are a student, if you're a new business owner, even if you're an experienced business owner, unless you're an absolute expert in Microsoft Excel, you may not know how to architect a spreadsheet in the same way that if you didn't really know how to code and you just started banging around in a code base, you may not understand why the structures are the way they are and kind of how to build those structures from scratch, right?
Right. No pun intended, right?
No pun intended.
So, actually, I want to get into your founder story, but I feel like this is the moment. Like, why don't you show us the platform? Like, walk us through what it looks like and how it works. And I think people that have not seen it before are going to be really excited about it.
Yeah, sure. And a little bit of kind of an intro leading into that. The idea here is that the tool should be easy enough to use so that even if you are not a finance person, even if you don't read any of the instructions and you just start clicking around, it should feel intuitive to use, right? And coming from I'm a certified public accountant and I've had a lot of experience with modeling. So coming from that world and understanding what level of complexity the user needs to get value out of a tool like this, to help them make strategic decisions about their business and how to allocate capital and all that is kind of really the goal of all of this. So this is the product that I built. It's called FlowCog Canvas. And this does not look like your typical accounting or finance software. It packs a serious punch, but it introduces layers of complexity to the user in a very digestible way, right? So the whole idea is to not overwhelm someone that hasn't done this thousands of times. If you're already an Excel whiz, you could still get value out of this, and you still probably help in terms of answering those what if questions and that scenario analysis. But if you're not an expert in Excel, those activities, those tasks are basically inaccessible to you unless you have some sort of tool like this to make it easier to do. So again, the kind of premise here is that this is a drag and drop tool. It's very visual, very heavily focused on those visualizations. I can walk you through a very simple example first, and then we can get into some of the more kind of complex features as we go. So right here, we have our revenue and expense blocks. And what those mean are those are going to dictate what your financial statements look like once you drag and drop these onto the canvas. So if we add a recurring revenue block, so think maybe a Netflix subscription, you're going to have that line, and you can change the names of these, on your income statement. That's going to be in the revenue section. And that's why that block here is linked to revenue, which links to net income, some of which is going to flow into cash. So the idea here is to get a very visual overview of what your business looks like, how money is moving through it. So let's dive in. We have a recurring revenue block on the canvas right now. We double click into it. And before I do that, let's close out here. This kind of tutorial button over here, there's some onboarding flows to help users acclimate to the product if they don't know where to start. There's kind of plenty of videos and lesson plans and tutorials there. And then, of course, the new AI Magic Build feature that I'm really excited to show you and reveal to the world for the first time, but we'll get to that a little bit later.
Yeah, absolutely. One
Okay.
thing,
Yeah.
you mentioned like someone who knows Excel, this, might not have as much bearing, but I think about my process and I use Excel a lot. I usually start with a whiteboard and really sketch out what it is I'm trying to do. Because I find I have to almost have the whole picture in mind, so that I know how to structure the Excel sheet and to do some things that might take a lot of steps. But if I plan from the beginning, I can do things that I can reuse over and over again, some driving cells and those kinds of things. So I really see value in this. Even if someone's an expert at Excel, it's like this would be a great place to start because you could sketch it out, model it out in a few minutes. And then once they had that piece, they know it's almost like create a roadmap for building an Excel sheet. So I think it has a relevance even for a more experienced audience that does work with more of a spreadsheet type program.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that's what I find with folks that are self-proclaimed Excel experts, where they have used Excel pretty extensively, but at the same time, they still know that you can get those tasks done. You can get that scenario analysis or answer those what if questions, but it takes a while, and version control's an issue, and changing the formula in one cell breaks the spreadsheet elsewhere, and now the income statement, the net income from the income statement is not flowing through properly to the cash flow statement. So the whole thing is kind of it gets hairy pretty quickly. So yeah, I would agree that even for folks that are pretty good at Excel, to basically avoid this whole Frankenstein spreadsheet problem entirely and kind of sidestep it and be able to use an easier tool like this that still packs a punch, but lets you kind of reason about if you want to think of it as a product, the roadmap of the model that you're building, right? This overview, and kind of organizes it a little bit easier for you. So yeah, let's dive in. The block on the canvas right now, we only have one. It's the recurring revenue block. And we'll double click into that. And you see here that we have a start date and an end date of this revenue stream. We're going to say that it goes on indefinitely. Let's change this. Let's say that we are maybe Netflix in the early days and we have some customers, maybe we have $5,000 a month in revenue coming in, but maybe we're growing rapidly. Maybe we're growing at 100% year over year. And for a lot of folks, they don't really understand what the implications are of different growth rates and how those compound over time. So what that means is that if we start off at $5,000 a month, January 2024, by the time we get to January 2025, we're already at 10,000. So we've doubled. Same thing, January 2026, we've doubled again. Now we're at 20,000. So being able to understand, okay, what are the implications here? If I were to try to understand my business and its growth rate and what is realistic so that I can manage my business properly, am I going to be able to hit that 100% growth rate year over year? And there are ways of kind of changing that and having different growth rates at different points in time as well. And I can show that a little bit later. But for now, we're going to stick with this kind of basic example of one revenue stream growing at 100% year over year. So let's add in some payroll. Maybe we have some engineers on staff that are required to build the product. So let's double click into that. Maybe we are paying them $10,000 a month, which I would say might be a little bit on the low end if we're in a major metropolitan area, especially if we're in San Francisco, New York City, Austin, Texas. So we have a start date of this month and $10,000 a month in this payroll expense. Let's duplicate this and say that we expect to hire another software engineer, maybe sometime in let's call it April. And they're also $10,000 a month. So for the first few months, we'll have a total payroll expense of $10,000. That jumps up to $20,000. Yeah. Okay, last block that we'll put on the canvas for this example is a marketing expense. And let's say that these are Facebook ads, for instance. Let's change this from $800 to $3,000 a month. And let's say that it's growing 50% year over year, and maybe we don't start that until, let's say March. So for the next few months, we're not going to have any marketing spend. It's going to jump up to $3,000 and then grow from there each month. Okay, yeah. So far we have 2 expense blocks on the canvas. We have the payroll, we have the marketing, and we have our recurring revenue block as well on the canvas. We have $50,000 in our current cash balance. We can change that, of course. Let's go to the outcomes and see what this looks like so far. So all we did was switch from the canvas tab to the outcomes, and you'll see here that we have a few different visualizations. And kind of the goal here is to understand how much cash runway we have, meaning how many months of cash in the bank do we have before we run out of money. So if you're a profitable company, that number is infinite, right? If you're profitable, you're not burning cash, then you don't need to worry about cash runway unless you have some different plans for your growth strategy going forward and you plan to start burning cash and losing a bit of money in the future in order to build up a better revenue stream. In this case, we're losing money until 2026. So we're not a profitable company. Those software engineers are expensive and they don't outpace, the revenue stream does not outpace those salaries until mid 2026. So we have 4 months of runway. What can we do with this? Okay, so what? We're going to run out of cash. Is it all doom and gloom? Is there anything we can do about it, right? So if you put yourself in the shoes of a founder in this situation, there are a few options that you have, right? You can raise your revenue somehow. You can cut expenses. You can try to do some fundraising. Let's try that first. Let's say that we raise $200,000, and let's say that we do that in the month of April. When we add in that fundraising, we go from
only we're so simple, right?
So easy. It's just so easy to raise money.
Let's grab 200K in April, and
also, if it's already January, I highly recommend thinking about fundraising a lot sooner, because fundraising typically does not just take a month or two. It takes, expected to take 6 months, right?
Exactly.
So instead of having just 4 months of cash runway, now we have 19 months. That's great. We have this big spike in our cash balance, right? And we still run out of cash because, as you know, just because we are raising money from investors does not all of a sudden magically mean that we have a profitable business on our hands. So that revenue and cost break-even point did not change, right? We're still not even profitable until we get to, June or July of 2026. Okay, so how do we change that? Before we kind of figure out how to improve the situation further, I just want to show a few other kind of visualizations here. So we have our revenue and expense charts, our net income charts, cash balance. We also have this flow chart here, which is showing, okay, where's the money kind of coming from? Where is it going in terms of our revenue and expense streams? And of course, as you add more blocks to the canvas, this flow chart is going to update automatically to show you, based on which month we select, where the money is coming from, where it's going. And of course, we have our profit and loss statement, balance sheet, and cash flow statement that have all been generated automatically for us. And those update every time we either add or remove blocks from the canvas, or if we change any of those growth assumptions going forward for those blocks. So let's go back to our canvas here. Let's say that we want to improve our break-even point. What we're going to do is we're going to go back to the canvas, but we're actually going to duplicate this scenario. So we're going to copy the scenario. Now we have two canvases that we're working with. We have our original one and then our new one. Maybe we can rename this one scenario 2 with more revenue. Mm-hmm. And so now we have a better scenario. And let's say that our engineers came up with a brilliant new revenue stream. Maybe it's no longer mailing physical DVDs to folks if we're early on in the Netflix story, but now it's a streaming service, and maybe that starts off at $5,000 a month too. But that revenue stream doesn't begin until, let's call it, June of 2024, right? So there's a little bit of a lag time between when those engineers can build the product and when we're actually making money from that product. And we can change this revenue growth rate if we want. We can accelerate it and make it a little bit better and call this, streaming service. And this one is physical DVDs. And now when we go back to our outcomes in our scenario 2 with this additional revenue, we can see that we have a lot healthier of a business on our hands.
Yeah.
Instead of just these 19 months of cash runway, we actually hit a low point in the middle of 2025, which not coincidentally is the same point in time that we hit our revenue and cost break even. So all of a sudden now we, instead of becoming a profitable company in the middle of 2026, that point has been brought forward to the middle of 2025, which is great. We have a healthier business on our hands. We can now go back and forth between the scenario with less revenue, which is our original one, and see how all of these graphs update instantly and how we have a better business on our hands. Same thing with the P&L and the flow charts. We can see how when we switch back and forth, we have a lot different story in terms of the bottom line in scenario 1 versus scenario 2 with the additional revenue. Okay, so that is kind of the basic story of adding blocks to this canvas, having it be this kind of iterative process where you're asking questions of the software and you're able to manipulate those growth assumptions going forward, create different scenarios, compare them to each other, and get to the point where you're actually strategizing about what your business should be doing in the future and the implications of those decisions. And so that feedback loop, really in reality, you should be using a tool like this on a pretty consistent basis instead of just revisiting forecasting as a formal process once a year. Maybe having a tool like this lets you do it very quickly and is a lot easier to do, is less painful, of course, than the Frankenstein spreadsheet.
Right.
And at the same time, we know that we can have these different scenarios in these kind of separate boxes and be able to compare them to each other, which I think is really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I mean, to me, when I think about who your competition is, I feel like Excel or Google Sheets are probably your biggest competition, just because those that are used to doing those, that's where they're going to go. Where I see maybe a closer comparison, I think over the last, maybe 5 years, the gold standard has been LivePlan. Palo Alto software has had, a little bit more kind of a user-friendly way to build out financial modeling. If someone said to you, like, what's the difference? How would you describe what you do and how it's different from LivePlan or other technologies like that?
Yeah, and I think LivePlan is a great tool as well. There are a lot of good tools out there for founders, and I myself have some free resources for founders as well that are, more spreadsheet based. I would say if you think of you can almost think of these different products, FlowCog, Canvas, LivePlan, any others out there, kind of on a spectrum between balancing there's kind of a fine balance between complexity and usability, right? So if you want infinite degrees of freedom to be able to model out anything your heart desires, you probably want Microsoft Excel. That's at the far end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
And if you want something that is going to kind of introduce complexity in more bite-sized pieces to you, that would be where something like a FlowCog Canvas comes into play. So that's why I said at the beginning of our call, if you are already an Excel whiz and you've put in your 10,000 hours, like I have, you may not necessarily need a tool like FlowCog Canvas, although it still may make your life a lot easier. Again, coming up with this kind of what if analysis. But at the same time, then, we're not kind of doing these calculations in a vacuum, right? Typically, a company has more than one person, and they're trying to explain their trajectory and their projections to maybe another co-founder, maybe other employees that they're working with, maybe outside investors, maybe bank kind of lenders if you want to take out a loan to grow your business. So it's not so simple as just having these projections in a vacuum. So the balance again is between how easily presentable and visual are the results and the outcomes that you get from your tool versus something like, on the far end of the spectrum, Microsoft Excel, where you're really slogging through trying to build out these custom visualizations, which if you've ever tried to do in Excel or Google Sheets, can get you do a decent job, right? But it still takes a while, and there's a lot of steps to it. It's easy to get wrong, very time consuming. So if you kind of think of where FlowCog Canvas sits on that usability versus complexity sliding scale, I would say that it is probably the best balance that I've seen in terms of being able to introduce as little or as much complexity as you want. And I'll show you in a little bit the other new feature that I recently released, which is growth drivers. And that kind of gets more into the weeds on, instead of just having a single growth rate for your revenue streams, kind of explaining or demonstrating where that growth comes from in terms of the different sales and marketing avenues that you would use to acquire customers, right? So that kind of optional piece to this equation is not what the user should first see when they're dropped into this product, right? Because that's often overwhelming, not only for students in business classes and entrepreneurship classes, but even for founders out in the wild. It's just a lot to handle if you open up a piece of software and you're asked a ton of questions that are really detailed about each of your revenue and expense streams. It's a little bit overwhelming. So if you can kind of start off on first base with a template, with something easier that gives you kind of a high level overview that's very visual focused, I would say that that's where kind of FlowCog Canvas stands out. And it's a lot easier on the eyes, I would say, than maybe some other solutions to this problem. So the idea here is really focused on the user experience, introducing, having kind of a simple introduction to the product, and then introducing complexity where we need it. And that was kind of the motivation for the AI magic build feature, which I'm perfectly happy to dive into now and show you. But if we want to take a pause, I know I've been doing a lot of talking. We can kind of recap what we've gone through so far as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think, I think what you can see from these couple of examples is just the visual nature of it. I actually think it's particularly helpful for someone who doesn't have a strong accounting or finance background to be able to see how things connect. Payroll is a cost, but ultimately the way it impacts net influence or net income is through the expense category and so on. I see like cost of goods sold, and depending on the type of business model you have, you may have different variables. So I think that's really powerful. And it just helps to really get the information into a place that's easy to understand. Particularly if someone's building a pitch deck, I can see where this gives them almost really everything they need. If they model this well, everything they would need for a pitch deck. What about if someone was building a formal business plan? Like, what kinds of output or reports or visuals or data, would be available to really support more of that formal business plan for, those cases where somebody's going for funding from a fairly sophisticated investor? Obviously, they're going to have that much more formal business plan. So what does that look like, and how would FlowCog support that?
Yeah. So depending on the level of complexity that you're looking for in terms of the outcomes, the good thing is that I've still allowed on the balance sheet, income statement, and cash flow, the ability to export this to Excel if you wanted to include this in a formal document that you're sending over to investors or to banks. And all of these charts and graphs that we showed before, these are all exportable. So you can export the flow chart, you can export any of these cash balance projections as well. There's also something down here that I didn't show, which is the, depending on the industry that we're talking about, a really good benchmark to go by is this kind of, as especially these days in 2024, as investors and banks start to focus more on efficient growth and profitability. One measure of that efficiency is how much are you growing given the current level of employees that you have. And so you can see here, this is an annual revenue per employee versus the benchmark for that industry. That's something, of course, that you can also export down and include in a presentation. But that is something that you would be able to show in terms of and kind of use that to support your fundraising narrative or to support your business plan and say, hey, we know that we're not really efficient right now because it's the early days of our business and our marketing and sales and marketing engine hasn't kicked in yet. We don't have much word of mouth. Eventually, though, we're going to start to grow at a pretty solid rate. And this is how our annual revenue per employee improves from today. And then going, you see here, we kind of crossed the benchmark sometime in mid 2025. How our business is progressing, right? So being able to tell that story, and that's a big part of what I work with founders on when they're trying to raise money and going out and either talking to VCs or talking to banks, is how do your projections, while still being grounded in reality, how do they support your fundraising narrative? The story that you're telling about how you're growing your business, again, kind of like what we said with the additional revenue stream, for instance, that would be part of the story to investors, to the bank, is, hey, right now we're in the early days of Netflix and we ship physical DVDs to folks, and that's how we make our money, and it's recurring. But we also have this thing called streaming, which we think the internet is ripe for right now. And so we want to show you what the impact to our business is going to be once we start to account for that expected revenue in the future. So the idea then is that these projections support that overall story, which is what your business plan should be telling, right? It's not only the kind of more creative aspects of entrepreneurship in terms of the product that you're building and your distribution strategies for how you're going to reach out to customers and everything, but also the kind of cold hard numbers that go along with that story, and kind of making those two sync up with each other and making sure that those numbers really support that story is the goal of this whole thing, right? Not only for telling that story to yourself and making sure that you have a gut check on how realistic that growth is, because there are very dire consequences if you overestimate your own revenue and you decide to hire a bunch of folks and then need to lay them off at some point in the future. So both internally and externally would be the idea of using something like this.
Nice. Yeah, I can see how a lot of these visuals could be copied right into a formal business plan. And then some narrative could be added. And then of course, the Excel spreadsheets is where you can really provide that backup or create other analytics to support the narrative as well. So I love it. Well, I know you're itching to show us the AI magic build, and we are itching to see it. So why don't we dive in and take a look? I'd love to see what you got.
All right, let's see. This is the first live demo of it. So we'll see how it does. Let's do this. Let's delete out these scenarios, and so we have our new scenario here. We're going to click this AI magic build, right? So this is the same screen, this blank canvas that a student or a founder would see once they sign up for this product and activate it. They would see a blank canvas. You have some templates on the side here that you can add, which kind of add a bunch of blocks at once.
Actually, I'd be interested to see like a template, like for something like manufacturing, where you have an actual cost of goods sold.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when you click and drag the manufacturing template here, it can be overwhelming, right? There's a lot of blocks, but that is the reality of manufacturing. You don't, if we're in the world of atoms and not just bits, not just digital goods and services, if we're making something physical and selling it, yes, you have your sales, but you also now have accounts receivable, inventory, fixed assets, and all of these expenses here. You have raw materials cost, maintenance expense, freight expense, insurance. So there's a lot that goes into it. And the purpose of some of these templates is to be able to point founders and students in the right direction to help them think about, okay, these are the ingredients or the components that go into this equation. This is what a manufacturing company looks like. These are the things that you have to take into account if you want to start manufacturing a physical good and ship it to someone. It's a lot more difficult than just selling something digital over the internet, because there's a lot of other considerations. So this is kind of what that would look like. There's a lot that goes into it. Of course, if you don't have some of these, maybe you don't have I'm trying to see which one of these is not necessary to delete. Maybe if we don't have legal fees, you can kind of delete this out. Maybe you don't expect to have any legal troubles. Maybe your insurance covers that, so you don't expect to have any future legal fees, which might be a little bit unrealistic. But if you delete that block from the canvas, you can see that that is no longer showing up in your expense section. And again, all of the blocks that we have on the canvas, you can rename them. So, in the kind of block selection library on the left-hand side on the canvas view, you didn't see anything called raw materials cost here, but that's because in the template that I built for users, I renamed that block so that when they add that template, they can see the specific names of these expense categories as it relates to a manufacturing company. And those are the ones that should show up on your P&L.
Right.
So you can rename everything and customize it that way.
Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting just to see, like, if you can cycle one out, just the difference in complexity for something like an e-commerce business, or a SaaS business, which I would think would be much simpler.
Yeah. So if we're talking about SaaS, right, there are still some complexities. You still have accounts receivable to deal with, right? Just because you make a sale does not mean that you instantly collect that money, especially when it comes to B2B software, business to business. If you're selling a piece of software that costs $50,000 a year, that's typically not going to be a situation where someone just swipes a credit card and right when you make the sale, you're getting that money. There's going to be a lag time relative to that sale in terms of the benefits that you get from cash. And that means that you have a higher accounts receivable balance on your balance sheet. And it also means that you have a lower cash balance on your balance sheet, so that you do take a hit in terms of your working capital requirements there. And that is true of a lot of B2B software companies as well. Now, the benefit that you get too is that you are accelerating some of the cash benefits of selling a long-term contract where you may still be collecting for it up front, and there still may be a delay from when the customer signs the contract, but maybe 30 or 60 days later, you're getting the benefits of that cash for services or software that you plan to deliver to them over the next 12 months. So there is that kind of balancing act there, which is called deferred revenue. If we're talking about the revenue and expense side of things, a lot of software companies don't just have the regular recurring revenue stream. They also have kind of one-time implementation fees. And then, of course, you'll see if you look at any public software company, even private ones really should be showing this, where you have a separate section for service revenue, which is typically not as profitable to the company, but profitable enough where you want to offer that. So if you're selling a $100,000 a year piece of software to another business, oftentimes you will sell an additional professional services component in that contract. And so you want to break that out separately on your profit and loss statement so that when you're doing the calculations for all of your metrics and you're looking for just the recurring revenue on the software side, you can do those calculations and separate out the implementation revenue of getting that software up and running for the customer, as well as those ongoing professional services, so that for investors, for banks, even for your own sake, those benchmarking metrics, that comparability that you can use to make better decisions about your business is still there. If we're talking about on the expense side, of course, we have hosting costs, right? Maybe these are AWS, Amazon Web Services, hosting fees to host the software application. So there's still quite a bit that goes into what it takes to run a software company, right? It's not just the simple example that we started off with, which was one revenue block and a payroll expense block and a marketing expense block. Right. So the idea here, again, is to be able to layer in complexity as you go, as you start to understand your business better, and kind of do it piecemeal so that it's not overwhelming at first. Right. So I would say that those are kind of the more for once you feel comfortable with the product, you can kind of dive into those templates. And now you're talking, many blocks on the canvas, both in the revenue and in the expense category, and then on the asset and liability side as well.
Yeah.
Now, the kind of evolution of just having a static template like this is being able to ask artificial intelligence, build this canvas for me based on information that I give you.
Right.
And that is kind of
what we've all been waiting for.
This is the kind of trick up my sleeve, brand new. This is the worldwide exclusive here. I haven't showed this to anyone else. This is the AI magic build feature of FlowCog Canvas. So let's get started. Let's delete out these scenarios.
First on the Entreprofessor. So I love it. World premiere.
The world premiere of the AI magic build feature for FlowCog Canvas right here with Doc John. Okay, so we are going to click on this AI magic build feature. And there was a lot of blood, sweat, tears, and late night coding sessions to make this happen. And I kind of skipped the whole part of my intro and my background. In addition to being a CPA, I'm also a programmer and very interested in artificial intelligence and what the implications are of it for helping founders and business owners run their businesses more efficiently, and kind of how that starts to bleed into helping students understand how money is flowing through a business as well, even without having any sort of real world business experience yet. So the whole idea here is, if numbers are very intimidating, maybe you're a student that's taken a few accounting classes or maybe just one accounting class, or you've heard of a profit and loss statement before, but you're not really sure how to build one or what it looks like, especially for different industries, you can come to this AI magic build feature and you can type in English what business you want to build your canvas for. So in this case, I didn't have anything in mind. We can come up with one together and see what the result is. Some of the examples here are, a food truck offering a fusion of traditional and gourmet tacos, right? Maybe it's a nail salon specializing in creative nail art, $2K per month and revenue, rent $2K per month, revenue is $10K. You can give as much or as little detail as you want, and the results are going to vary, right? Yeah. So I don't know.
So how about a content influencer creation media company for helping accidental entrepreneurs to launch, grow, and thrive using YouTube and other social media outlets as a channel for spreading the message. All right, is that a little too on the nose? I don't know.
The name of it is the Entreprofessor. Did I get that right?
You did, yeah.
On the spelling?
Yeah.
With Doc John.
Nice.
And he has an excellent setup with great guests. Free at this point.
All around.
But some folks may demand payment in the future. I'll leave that part out.
All right.
And he has an excellent setup.
Yeah. All right.
Okay. So, and of course, let's copy and paste this for a second. You could just do create a random business for me, right? Yeah. This one came up with a platform for renting high-end camera gear to photographers and videographers, gear maintenance and replacement costs. Okay, interesting. A vintage record store specializing in rare vinyl records, health and wellness coaching, a virtual reality training platform for professional development. That's an interesting one. Let's go back to our Entreprofessor one. So we're going to click have the AI work its magic. So right now behind the scenes, there's a lot going on. If you haven't heard of the company OpenAI, which I'm sure everyone has at this point, they're the ones that are responsible for creating ChatGPT, which we all know and love. If you haven't used it yet, it is free to sign up. Highly recommend using it. They have what's called an API, which allows programmers to tap into their core technology and ask specific questions and get back answers generated by their AI. And that comes in many different shapes and sizes. Maybe you ask it to write some poetry for you. which I've done when reaching out to entrepreneurship professors, say, hey, write me a holiday jingle to try to get this professor to open my sales email. And hopefully they do. And I've had some success with that. Not quite, it's not quite the winning formula yet, but ChatGPT has helped me do something like that. So it can get pretty creative. Now, in this case, we're not asking it to write a poem for us. We're asking it to do some kind of really much more specific task of generating a canvas of revenue and expenses here. So again, there's nothing hard coded into my code base that said, hey, place an educational services block on the canvas, or taxes or personnel costs or sales and marketing or administrative expenses. None of that was, the AI basically generated all of this, right? Yeah. So I have no clue what this is going to look like when I double click into this. We have educational services. Okay, great. Look, now we're making money. Okay, Doc John does a great job spreading the word on entrepreneurship on YouTube. He is now selling online courses, bringing in $70,000 a month. That's a pretty penny. He's doing webinars, he's doing one-on-one coaching, and those all have their own growth rates and monthly amounts within this educational services block.
Yeah, I feel like OpenAI must be scanning my database or something.
Yeah, they have a lot of faith in Doc John to really knock this out of the park. We have personnel costs.
As far as the categories, I would say are spot on. So yeah,
this is when we're talking making content editor hires and other salaries. This seems like a pretty big operation that Doc John has going on based on the revenue block. So they need a lot of salaries. He may need to hire some contractors. If you're bringing on a bunch of full-time folks, you need to give them health insurance and add in some additional perks. Yeah. So that's that separate line there.
Sobering reality check right there, right?
Yeah, the admin expenses. Maybe you have some software that you use, StreamYard as an example, to do some webinars. Maybe you have some miscellaneous expenses, office supplies. So it kind of builds this canvas for you based on the information we give it. And if we gave it more information about revenue levels and expense levels overall, it would calibrate all of the blocks to take into account that information. And we still get the same result where we go to the outcomes, and we haven't done any actual work yet. We haven't edited growth assumptions. We haven't added blocks physically to the canvas. All we did was type in English words into the AI Magic Build box there. And it has created this profit and loss statement going out 3 years or 5 years into the future based on the information we gave it. And here we have our educational services in terms of our revenue. We have all of these expenses here. And for the foreseeable future, it looks like we're spending more money than we're making. But at the same time, then we can go in and start to say, okay, maybe some of those expense streams are a little bit aggressive. Maybe Doc John doesn't expect to have that level of staff just yet, so we can cut back some of that expected spend on payroll. Maybe the revenue streams are going to grow faster than expected or slower than expected, right? So if he's starting off with $50,000 in the bank, we can start to see from there what that profitability kind of story looks like over time. If we go to the flow charts here, in February of 2024, the next projected month, we're bringing in money, right? We're bringing in a lot of money from educational services, $141,000, but a big chunk of that is going out the door on the personnel side right away. Not to mention all the sales and marketing that Doc John has to do to get people in the top of the funnel there to convert into customers. And then cost of goods sold, I'm not sure. We didn't click into that one. I'd be curious to see what that is. For a company like this, maybe hosting costs with software providers. So there's kind of a lot that goes into this equation. And again, all we did to generate this was we went in here, we typed something in, and it created the canvas for us.
Yeah. And what I would say, I'd say the assumptions of the model that it created are spot on. Like you say, we would have to go in and really adjust a lot of the numbers and but the types of revenue streams, the types of expenses, are all, accurate. And, what you see there is some of the harsh realities of this type of business is that it does, like all businesses, that there's a lot of time and cost that goes into developing the platform and getting traction with it and those kinds of things before it actually turns a profit. And you have to have a range of revenue streams to do that. And I could see where you might add in things like affiliate marketing. You might add in
exactly,
additional types of partnerships, or maybe merch or something like that. But that's really powerful just to see the way the AI was able to really model that out, even just from a really a 1-sentence prompt, which I'm always a big fan of. I say, don't write a 1-sentence prompt, write a 2-page prompt, because you're going to get better results. And so it will be a lot of fun to experiment with that to see what's possible. But I can see where this could be really meaningful in educational scenarios, like trying to teach the basics of financial modeling, but certainly as a startup founder, being able to get that preliminary business model and adapt it over time. I love it. It's just really, really useful. And I don't really think I've seen anything like it. I think we talked a little bit about LivePlan. I think they have some of those concepts if you're, doing a lot of really formal reporting and documentation, but to be able to visualize the intake and use AI to drive that is really powerful.
Yeah. And one of the kind of pinpoints that kept coming up over and over in my own customer discovery, speaking with entrepreneurship professors, which is now the kind of niche I found for this tool, in addition to other early stage founders and business owners out there. But for entrepreneurship professors specifically, the ability to kind of maintain the student's interest. How do you do that, right? I mean, I have templates here, lesson plans and everything, but the way you do that is to be able to have a business that a student is actually interested in, whatever they like, whether it's, a video game company that they want to start, whether it's a content creator business, whether it's a, doggy daycare in your neighborhood, right? Being able to come up with something that's specific to the student's interests and being able to kind of start them off on first base with whatever that is. And letting them give as much or as little detail as they want, right? Some students that can imagine different revenue and expense levels, maybe they enter that into that AI Magic Build prompt and they write a little bit of a longer story here, right? It doesn't need to be 2 pages, but maybe it's more than 1 sentence. So the more information you give it, the more specific the canvas is going to look, but at least it's going to be relevant to the student's interests overall, which is where I think this is really a game changer for that kind of the entrepreneurship education landscape, and being able to really make all of the exercises and the emphasis be on topics that students are actually interested in. I haven't been a student for a while now, but I've heard that students have a slightly lower maybe attention span than they used to. And so a tool like this to be able to keep them engaged is really the emphasis here, and making the lives of entrepreneurship professors a little bit easier. Of course, as you saw, it doesn't mean that all of this is done for you. You still have to go in and say, well, is this level of revenue and expense that the AI came up with, is that reasonable? Can we expect that? How are we going to get there, right? And one thing that I didn't show, which is kind of getting a little bit more on the complex side, is being able to add in these driver blocks and say, okay, here we have the, maybe we have, like you said before, affiliate partners here. How many leads are these affiliate partners going to bring in each month for us? At what rate are they going to convert into customers? How much did we essentially have to pay for those leads? And then what is the revenue that you're getting from the customers from this lead source? And being able to kind of see how that individual driver is responsible for some of the revenue or expenses in this particular scenario, and being able to add multiple of these. If we want to go deeper, we can do that. And so it kind of, again, the idea of being able to strike that balance between the layers of complexity, adding in that additional complexity, going deeper when we need to or when we want to be able to, have the students or even the business owner think more critically about how they're going to achieve certain growth rates. Again, I wouldn't start with this block, but the idea of being able to kind of layer that in at the right point in time is, I think, pretty powerful as well.
Well, particularly if you're starting to show a long-term roadmap for how revenue is going to grow by stacking new initiatives and being able to show
Exactly.
what those initiatives are and how they both drive revenue and the potential expense implications. I love it. I think that's great. So I think in the time we have left, I would just like to hear a little bit more of, maybe a real brief origin story, but particularly like, what are you doing now to grow the business? You mentioned universities and entrepreneurship professors, and what's the long-term vision?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and that's something that is changing, right? That kind of strategy that, if whatever you want to call it, your business plan, your lean business model canvas, your vision for the company, right, is changing in the sense that it's becoming a little bit more refined over time. So if you think about kind of serving an ideal customer, what does that customer look like? At the beginning of the journey, it was just, okay, anyone that is running a business or anything having to do with business at all, right? And you can cast that wide net, but then all of your marketing materials, your sales efforts are going to be spread pretty thin. And so being able to kind of refine that and narrow down who your ideal customer is and focusing on them. Right now it's kind of shifting, right? I do have the early stage founder, the business owner of a small business, that gets a lot of value out of this, that is kind of using some of the additional features that I didn't show. There's a QuickBooks integration, there's a Xero integration. Those are two accounting systems that most small businesses use. So, you can kind of plug and play and pull in all of your historical data, build the canvas for you, and then start to see your historical numbers next to your projections. That's a very specific kind of customer and use case for that, for a tool like this. And it works well with that segment. But the other segment now is entrepreneurship professors that are looking for a tool that's easier to use for students, that keeps them engaged, that you can get familiar enough, that has an easy enough learning curve so that you can cover enough ground and really teach them something in the span of one semester. That's been working out really well. And that kind of journey of identifying that customer, them coming to me with that pain point and saying, hey, right now we're using Excel templates that my students find on the internet, which is a mess because it's not specific to their hypothetical company that they're coming up with. It's too complicated. They're not Excel experts. All the financial statements are broken and don't flow through to one another. They have no idea how to do a scenario analysis or ask a what if question with those resources. The idea then is to give them a tool that they can use and feel comfortable with, and almost have it be a playful experience to use to keep them engaged throughout the semester. That's now really the one of my main kind of customer profiles now, is to be able to say, okay, which entrepreneurship professors are going to be forward-looking enough to take a chance on a relatively new company, right? This piece of software has been around for about 6 months now in the wild. There were previous iterations of it that were a little bit harder to use, more complex. But I think with this most recent kind of pivot or version of the product that's been around for 6 months, the focus has really been on usability and how easy it is to get up and running with something like this, with an emphasis on those visualizations. And that, I would say, is a lot more palatable for professors when they see the product for the first time and they see, oh, this is great. My students are going to love this. This looks very different from anything that they've seen before. And it takes the conversation from, staring at numbers in tables in a textbook to something that is living and breathing, that they can kind of touch and play around with, which is a very different experience, right? This concept of experiential learning and being able to have a tool for entrepreneurship professors is really kind of, as I've spoken to more professors, the area of, or the focus of the product that I'm starting to hone in on, which, as we saw with the AI magic build feature, for students that are just terrified of numbers, they can just give up an English prompt with English words, no numbers at all, and the AI will build them a canvas they can click into and start to see, oh, okay, these are the different components of a business that I need to think of. So having said all of that, I really do think that the niche that I'm most excited to serve are, students that and professors that are trying to convey these concepts of entrepreneurship and how to run a business, what goes into it, being able to make everything less intimidating for them and kind of overall raise the, call it, financial literacy of students across the country. I mean, I think that's really the mission that has evolved once I kind of discovered this new segment and realizing back to my days in school, wow, I majored in accounting. I didn't really get exposure to running a business in the way that some entrepreneurship programs are teaching. And I would have loved a tool like this in school to be able to help me understand, okay, these are all of the different dimensions that you need to think of when you're planning a business or if you're thinking about starting your own business. So there is kind of a lot to unpack with all of that, and where my tool kind of fits in is really the thing that I'm kind of developing and honing in on and getting feedback from professors and trying to kind of perfect in terms of really making it as easy as possible to use for students, as making it less intimidating than any other tool out there, especially Excel, and being able to give that user experience that leaves people, amazed and saying, wow, I can't believe that something as boring as, revenue and expense numbers could look this interesting, right?
Yeah, that's awesome. So if someone wanted to try this out, if a student wanted to try it out, or if a professor was thinking about using it, like what's the best way to go and get engaged with you or to try it out? What are some of the ways that that people could connect?
Yeah, so you can email me directly at adam@flowcog.com, FLOWCOG. You could reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm very active there. You could sign up for an account. If you are a student, I would say you can email me directly and you can CC your professor and we can have a conversation that way. If you're a professor, of course, you can reach out to me directly as well. Happy to give a demo and go a little bit more in depth about getting it set up and using it for your classroom, different tutorials, videos, lesson plans, things like that. This is something that I'm pretty passionate about. So I'm happy to be quite flexible in terms of what is needed from a kind of user experience standpoint of not only the students, but also the professors, of being able to introduce this in an easy to kind of understand way to the students.
Awesome. Yeah. And I'll include all those links down below in the description. So for anyone who wants to reach out to Adam, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, Adam, before we wrap, I always like to ask, what is your favorite founder film?
I have a few of them. There are a lot of good ones. I like the most recent example that I could think of would be the movie Air. And that is if you haven't seen it, I won't give any spoilers. It's a movie about Michael Jordan's shoe deal. Michael Jordan coming out of college, being this amazing prospect, but not necessarily having the same kind of critical acclaim as some of the other athletes out there in terms of the desire of shoe companies to get shoe deals done. Right. There still was a lot of competition, but Nike going out and being kind of scrappy, going from this company that was producing running shoes at the time to then pivoting somewhat into basketball shoes, which was this kind of new concept for them. And this kind of whole idea of entrepreneurship within a company, some people call it intrapreneurship. This idea of being able to apply that level of innovative thinking from first principles to create something new that serves a different customer segment that you weren't serving before, right? So in this case with Nike, working really hard and the kind of spark of genius coming from a small group of folks to really take a chance and say, hey, we're putting our neck on the line here and we're going to give this huge contract to this basketball player. We don't know how it's going to turn out. In the beginning of the story, the kind of the Michael Jordan's family was very skeptical, and there was kind of a lot that goes into it. And you see the scrappiness of this of this kind of marketing department within Nike that has to go out and really convince the family and convince Michael to go with Nike over some of the other competitors out there, and the tactics that they use, and kind of the way they get to know the family. And it's a lot more focus on that kind of personal relationship selling, if you will, than just kind of these blanket deals that the other companies were sending out. So entrepreneurship and intrapreneurship does involve a good degree of risk, and it doesn't always work out, right? This could have been if Michael Jordan was a huge flop in the NBA, they had a big contract with him, that would have been really bad for Nike, because they were paying him a good amount of money and they were investing a lot of time and energy into this new product line. So just this idea of being able to really see an opportunity, something that's uncharted territories, and go after it. And that being a form of entrepreneurship within an existing company. Again, entrepreneurship
really I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Adam, it was so awesome having you on the channel. I really can't wait to have you back. And, just as we see the evolution of FlowCog, really innovative, really powerful and useful for entrepreneurs, for those studying entrepreneurship, for those that are just really wanting to understand financial modeling, that don't have that strong technical background in Excel and other things like that. And just great to hear your story. Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks so much, Doc John.
All right, keep going.